With so many different Bibles out there today, how do you know which one is right? How can they be so different and still all be the Word of God? Which one is the Bible? There is a common misconception that Bible translations all say basically the same thing, and the differences are only things like translation styles and modernization of words. It is also believed that there are no noteworthy differences in meanings, and certainly no differences in fundamental beliefs. Scholars use all sorts of intelligent-sounding phrases like dynamic equivalence, formal equivalence, and a host of other terms. But these concepts make it easy to overlook a very important topic that underlies everything. And that is the actual source documents used for the translation. We often hear preachers say, "The original Greek says this," to which we should ask, which Greek are you talking about? Yes, there is more than one version of the Greek, and there are often substantial differences between them. Should we just leave it in the hands of the so-called experts to decide what the true text is? Watch this video, then you decide. The differences between Bible versions are significant, and there are reasons behind those differences. The New Testament text is where most of the disputes come in. The different readings in the Old Testament text has some problems too, but this video will just focus on the issues pertaining to the New Testament. When we talk about different Bibles, it is most often called translations. The word translations makes it sound like the differences only exist because of the way it is translated. But there is a whole lot more to it than that. It is also important to understand that Bibles are generally not translated from manuscripts directly, but the translation is done from books called Greek texts. These are books that are compiled by collating multiple manuscripts. Let's start from the beginning. The original manuscripts are penned for the first time. The text needs to be transmitted from one location to many and preserved for future generations. These originals are called the original autographs. These originals are copied, the copies are copied, and the copies of the copies are copied, and so on. We end up with thousands of manuscript copies spread out across vast landscapes. The witness of history confirms this to be the way God kept the Bible for us. Now you might ask, why would God do it that way? Well, let's consider the opposite approach. A complete Bible falls out of the sky and ends in the hands of a few individuals. They keep it safe, and only they are responsible for looking after it and distributing the text. There are some big problems with this method. How do you know it gets faithfully copied? How do you know that these individuals have not modified the original text? What happens if the original gets damaged or destroyed? The actual method observed in history makes a lot more sense than the fall out of the sky method. Over the past 150 years or so, the attitude towards the transmission and preservation of the text has changed dramatically, and that is what has given rise to a discipline called textual criticism. In short, textual criticism is the process of identifying the correct text in an attempt to reconstruct the original. Decisions need to be made to decide which text is the true text. This has become a very complex process. The basic idea of textual criticism has always been necessary to some degree, but what we have seen in the last few decades is a completely new discipline that has taken the task to a whole new level of complexity. Advanced algorithms are used to determine the most probable reading of the text. Manuscripts are assigned categories which impact their priorities when they are considered for authenticity. A manuscript believed to be very old would typically be assigned Category 1, while a later manuscript would be considered Category 5. The basic idea is this: an older manuscript is considered to be closer to the original because it would have gone through less copying and thus less errors. This is enforced as a hard and fast rule. Although it might sound sensible, it is not free of problems. What if an early copy was corrupted? What if a copy is considered early when it is actually not early? The basic assumption made by textual critics is that the New Testament text has been lost, and we need to recover it as best we can. This is also where debates come in about whether the Bible has been preserved through the generations, or if it was lost and we need to reconstruct it. What is important to note is that with modern textual criticism, any and every manuscript available gets considered, even manuscripts that are vastly different from any other manuscript. The age of the manuscript gets so much priority that an old manuscript that has a totally unique reading is often considered more important than a later manuscript that agrees with many other manuscripts. This means that there are times where the reading of one single manuscript gets used to compile the Greek text, even though there are 100 other manuscripts that all agree on a different reading. So in other words, one lone witness is considered better than 100 witnesses which agree, just because it is considered older. There are some manuscripts that are so full of problems that they need to be discarded altogether. But with modern textual criticism, they still get considered. And when they are believed to be very old, they are taken very seriously. Here's the problem, and the reason for this video. Are the old manuscripts really as old as they say? Especially those assigned a high category, Category 1? There are two manuscripts in particular that are considered very old. Thus, they have an enormous impact on what ends up in modern Greek texts, and subsequently in modern Bibles in English and other languages. Older Bibles, whether Greek texts or the translations, were not affected by these manuscripts because they were not used as part of the source manuscripts until more recently. These two manuscripts are called Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus. The discovery of Codex Sinaiticus in the mid-19th century had a huge impact on what ends up in modern Bibles. Not only because of its different readings, but also because it was very instrumental in the adoption of a new attitude towards the preservation of the Bible. It was also used to validate other manuscripts, most notably Codex Vaticanus, which wouldn't otherwise have been considered a reliable witness. Many readings in modern Bibles come from Codex Sinaiticus, and especially Codex Vaticanus. It turns out that the age of Codex Sinaiticus in particular is actually a rather controversial topic. If Codex Sinaiticus is not as old as they say it is, the entire textual criticism system is turned on its head and should be dismissed. If, however, it happens to be a 4th century document, as it is claimed, that still doesn't mean it should be used. There are many problems with it. For one, it leans towards the fall out of the sky transmission method, as mentioned earlier. The same goes for Codex Vaticanus. Let's start with some basic facts about Codex Sinaiticus. A codex is an early form of a book. It is called Codex Sinaiticus because of where it was found, which is in St. Catherine's Monastery at the foot of Mount Sinai. It includes some of the Old Testament with some Apocrypha books. It has a complete New Testament. In addition, it includes 2 New Testament Apocrypha books, the Epistle of Barnabas and the Shepherd of Hermas, or Barnabas and Hermas for short. High-resolution photographs of the entire codex can be viewed online at www.codexsinaiticus.org. Let's go into the history that is relevant to the age of Codex Sinaiticus. The story involves 2 men from the 19th century, called Constantine Tischendorf and Constantine Simonides. Tischendorf was born in 1815 in Germany. Here's how Wikipedia introduces him. Lobogott Frederick Constantine Tischendorf was a world-leading biblical scholar in his time. In 1844, he discovered the world's oldest and most complete Bible, dating from 325, with the complete New Testament not discovered before. Simonides was born in 1820 in Greece. Wikipedia says Constantine Simonides was a paleographer and a dealer of icons, known as a man of extensive learning with significant knowledge of manuscripts and miraculous calligraphy. He surpassed his contemporaries in literary ability. Some paleographers say that he was the most versatile forger of the 19th century. The events surrounding the 2 Apocrypha books, Hermas and Barnabas, turns out to be quite a problem for those claiming that Codex Sinaiticus is from the 4th century. Remember, these books are included in Codex Sinaiticus. That means they are bound hard to it as part of the Codex. The beginning of the Epistle of Barnabas even shares the same page as the end of the book of Revelation. Where it gets interesting is where standalone copies of Hermas and Barnabas show up, where we should wonder for a moment how this could actually be possible. And there is more regarding this issue. Leaving out a lot of the finer details, here are some of the events that played out in the 19th century. All of these events are verifiable historical facts. In 1844, Constantine Tischendorf goes to St. Catherine's Monastery and gets 43 leaves of the Codex and takes it to Leipzig, Germany. He goes back again in 1853 and gets nothing. In 1855, Simonides shows up in Leipzig, Germany, with a Greek copy of the Shepherd of Hermas, which was the first time anyone had seen a Greek copy of Hermas. In 1856, Tischendorf observes the Simonides Hermas and declared it to be a fake and a modern creation, not a copy of the original Greek, but a back translation from 14th century Latin. His reasons included it contains modern Greek words, there are issues with the grammar that would indicate modern authorship, and there are Latinisms. In 1859, Tischendorf goes back a 3rd time to St. Catherine's Monastery and gets the complete codex minus the 43 leaves that was taken in 1844. He takes it to St. Petersburg, Russia. In 1860, Tischendorf retracts what he said in 1856 about the Hermas of Simonides, now saying that it is in fact ancient. Also, in 1860, Simonides goes to Liverpool, England, to review a collection of manuscripts. Whilst in Liverpool, Plymouth Brethren theologian B.W. Newton shows Simonides a facsimile copy of Tischendorf's Codex Sinaiticus. He immediately says that it is not an old codex, but that he wrote it. On 27 July 1861, a British newspaper, The Guardian, runs the story of Simonides claiming to be the writer of Codex Sinaiticus. On September 1862, Constantine Simonides writes the Guardian newspaper and explains that the Codex is not from the 4th century, but that he created it. In October 1862, the Journal of Sacred Literature picks up on the article written by The Guardian the month before and publishes an elaborate account given by Simonides. Late 1862, Tischendorf publishes the St. Petersburg portion of the Mount Sinai discovery as Codex Sinaiticus, formally presented to Tsar Alexander II on 10 November 1862. In 1862 through 1864, the issue of Simonides being the creator of Codex Sinaiticus becomes argued and debated in the British press. In 1864, the scholar James Donaldson writes a book, A Critical History of Christian Literature and Doctrine, which contains a section where he explains how the Simonides Greek Hermes is almost identical to the Greek Hermes found in Codex Sinaiticus. He also identifies problems with the Greek Hermes found in Codex Sinaiticus that suggests that it is a modern creation. In 1871, the Revision Committee starts meeting to revise the King James Bible. In 1874, Donaldson updates what he said in 1864, including new information regarding the Epistle of Barnabas. Also in 1874, in Donaldson's book, The Apostolic Fathers, he mentions an edition of the Epistle of Barnabas printed by Simonides that contains the text as found in Codex Sinaiticus bearing the date 1843. In 1875, there is a character assassination job on Donaldson in the British press for Donaldson daring to point out that there is an unavoidable link between the Simonides Hermes and the one found in Codex Sinaiticus. In 1876, the Athenian Journal of Literature, Science and Art declared that Simonides printed a Barnabas just so that he can backdate it to 1843. Simonides could verify that he wrote the Barnabas in 1843 with a newspaper article. But then he was accused of fabricating the newspaper article, and the newspaper, they claimed, never existed. Tischendorf claims what he found is an ancient 4th century codex. Simonides claims that he recently wrote it. These are conflicting statements that cannot both be true. Let's step through this logically, looking at possible motives. So, in 1860, 4 years after calling Simonides Hermes a fake, Tischendorf now suddenly says that it is not a fake, but ancient, like Codex Sinaiticus. Now consider this. Tischendorf is trying to keep the world convinced that Codex Sinaiticus is an ancient document. It is his claim to fame after all. The discovery of the oldest Greek biblical manuscript in the world is no small matter, especially for this time. If the Simonides Hermes is not a threat to that, then why would he bother to retract what he said before and admit that he was wrong? There is no reason for him to do so. It is just an unnecessary embarrassment. Here's a motive that makes more sense. Because now having both the 1855 Simonides Hermes and the Codex Sinaiticus Hermes available to compare, he sees that they are almost identical. If the Simonides Hermes is to stay labeled as a modern fake, then the Hermes in Codex Sinaiticus also has to be a modern fake. That would make the entire codex a modern fake. He can't have that. So, in order to present Codex Sinaiticus as an ancient codex, he would also have to declare that the Simonides Hermes is ancient, which is exactly what he did. Unless there are people involved that need Codex Sinaiticus to be old, there is no point in attacking Donaldson in the British press in 1875. The truth is, by this time, there are many people that need it to be an old, legitimate codex. Here's what I think their motive is. Donaldson needs to be stopped, because he is letting a cat out of the bag that makes it difficult for everybody in the revision committee to keep face. In this time frame, their career is based on making a proper revision from a reliable manuscript. The revision committee is already meeting and has already adopted Codex Sinaiticus as the most ancient complete Bible in the history of the world, and is placing an extreme weight and authority on what it has to say. And here comes the guy saying, wait a minute guys, from their perspective, he needs to be stopped. Then there's the issue of Simonides being accused of forging a Barnabas and a newspaper article, even making up a newspaper that his accusers say do not exist. What drove them to make such an extreme claim? Here's a plausible motive. Again, the revision committee is already meeting and has already adopted Codex Sinaiticus as the most ancient complete Bible in the history of the world, and is placing an extreme weight and authority on what it has to say. And here Simonides is saying, wait a minute guys. Again, he needs to be stopped. It's funny how the Athenian Journal of Literature never mentions the name of the forged newspaper. By the way, the newspaper is called the Star of the East, and it did exist. So, Codex Sinaiticus, modern or ancient? Which option seems more plausible? You decide. Consider the following. The Epistle of Barnabas and the Shepherd of Hermas being included in Codex Sinaiticus is one of the most distinguishable features of Codex Sinaiticus. The same man that claims to have created Codex Sinaiticus releases never-seen-before copies of the Epistle of Barnabas and the Shepherd of Hermas before anyone finds Codex Sinaiticus. What are the odds of that happening if it was written in the 4th century? Either that is a miraculous coincidence, or Simonides is telling the truth. Was the discovery of Codex Sinaiticus really necessary to complete our Bible? If you support modern versions, you would have to say yes. Or if you think, well, the Bible was also fine before these quote-unquote discoveries, then you'd have to say that we don't need a Bible that is reliable and that more or less is okay. Then I would argue you to have a very low view of the Bible and God's ability to preserve His words. What I've presented here is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more information available on this topic. Amongst other things, there are issues related to different parts of the codex being different colors, suspicious unnatural wear, an odd cancel sheet, strange wormholes, and then there's the issue of the actual quality of the writing, which includes a plethora of marginal corrections and many more issues. Even if you think this codex is older than the majority text, after some investigation, you will find that it is certainly not better as some of the footnotes in modern Bibles describe it. Some final thoughts. God promised to preserve His words, and He did. We didn't have it wrong for 18th centuries, and then finally we must enter a never-ending venture of textual reconstruction. I appeal to you to take this issue seriously and investigate the topic in detail. If you have objections against what I've presented here, are you confident that your objections can overthrow all this controversy? Are you willing to put your understanding of God's Word on the line with your arguments? Really investigate the topic and then make an informed decision. I believe that God's true words are preserved in the King James Bible. There are other English Bibles, like the Geneva Bible, that are also unaffected by all these so-called modern discoveries. The Geneva Bible is a good Bible, but in my opinion, the King James Bible just happens to be the best there is, for many reasons. But the most important message I am trying to convey with this video is that modern versions are corrupt for plain and simple explainable reasons. Bottom line, if you don't have a King James Bible, the best-selling book of all times, get one. And then read God's pure words to us with great reverence. I know this is a lot of information, and it is not easy to wrap your head around immediately. So watch it a couple of times if you need to. May the Lord bless you, and may you find great blessing in God's Word. Thank you for watching.